Well, I hope you liked that little intro, and I bet it gave you an idea of what we're going to be making today. That's right, we're going to be making an awesomely fantastic shark tail. Now this project will be perfect for any sort of shark-themed or aquatic fursuits, as well as protogens, manokits, and even some cosplayers out there. I'm looking at you, Breath of the Wild. Now in order to make this tail, I'm going to be utilizing one of the other techniques that I've previously shown on this channel, that being my super motion tail tutorial. Granted, that tutorial itself is very outdated, and I need to update it sometime in the near future. I'm hoping to release the new and improved version sometime within the next month or so, but, you know, we'll see how that goes. But enough of my diddle-daddle and rambling. Let's go ahead and dive directly into this tutorial. Did you see what I did there? Now, when you start off, I find it's helpful to either use a mannequin or a duct tape dummy in order to accurately measure your template. Start from the base of the spine and measure down to the bottom of the booty. This should give you a wide enough base that the tail can attach naturally without looking too skinny or too fat. I then trace the pattern that I want onto my template paper. Now, whenever I draw my tails, I always add a slight curve to them because I think it helps with the natural shape a little bit. And, you know, it just makes them look a little bit nicer. You can always adjust this later on. This is the base of my template. I'm fairly happy with how it looks, but as always, there's usually something that has to be modified. But if you're ever curious about the length, you can do this trick. Whenever you're measuring any sort of long tail, you can lay down. If it measures from your hips to the tip of your toes, that's about the right length that your body should be able to support. Here I'm going through and I'm redlining the kind of changes I want to make, as well as just kind of measuring out where I'm going to be making my precise cuts. Once I'm happy with the way my template looks, I can then move into cutting it out of the foam. Now this type of foam is 3-inch polyurethane foam. It can be found at Home Depot or most hardware stores. Otherwise, you can check online. Lay down the primary piece of your template and trace it onto the foam. Now, you could cut this out with scissors, but it would take absolutely bloody forever, so I highly recommend investing in an electric knife because it works super duper well and slices right through this foam. Just be careful not to hurt yourself. These are super duper sharp tools. Once you have your base cut out, refine the shape if needed. With my base shapes cut out, I'm now ready to move into the next portion, which is to take 1-inch upholstery foam and measure almost halfway up the tail and sort of trace these little weird nugget shapes. This will help thicken the base of the tail and make it look a lot more natural, because most polyurethane foam is only about 3 inches thick, which looks a little bit too thin on the comparison of the body.
When you think that you lost, oh, I will take your hand and we'll rise up from the dust. Oh, here we go, 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 let us see.
Once you have these pieces cut out, go ahead and take your glue gun and glue each one onto each side of the tail. While those are gluing and sitting out, we can go ahead and trace the other pieces of our fins onto 1-inch foam. Cut each one out nice and smoothly.
Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and clear my throat.
When it comes to the tail fin, you don't want to use anything thicker than 1-inch foam. Anything more than that, and it'll end up being way too heavy. If you don't have access to 1-inch foam, you can also stack together a couple pieces of EVA foam, but beware that they will indeed make it heavier and you'll have to modify your tail shape in order to support the weight. I'll go over this more in depth when I make my supermotion tail tutorial. Once you've cut these pieces out, there is one more layer we're going to add with 1/2 inch foam just to bulk out the base of the tail a teeny tiny bit more. I know it seems excessive, but trust me, it's totally worth it in the end. Again, you're just going to kind of eyeball it and see where you need to thicken it out. A lot of this just comes from trial and error. I know the first couple of tails I made ended up way too skinny. And the very first one I ever made, if you remember way back when I made my first supermotion tail tutorial, Winza's tail turned out way too thick. It looked so chunky and awkward. While those pieces are gluing, you can go ahead and bevel the edges of your smaller fins. This will make them look much more natural and soft, as well as just overall looking super duper pretty. Bevel the tail fin as well.
Here we go again. Trying hard, but you wanna be my friend. Ain't no place to hide, ain't no one to run to. Here we go again. Call my bluff, I'ma be here till the end.
With all these pieces now beveled and the others glued together, you can now start by actually smoothing out and shaping the tail. You can do your rough cuts using your electric knife if you have one, otherwise you're going to have to use your scissors and take your time with it because it will take absolutely forever.
I can help you out. 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 Here we go again. Time is up and I'm calling up my friends. Ain't no wonder why, ain't no wonder right to. Here we go again. Call me up and you wanna be my friend. I'm the one you ride, I'm the one you ride to. If you don't.
Once you get your rough cuts done, you can now come in with your scissors and spend tedious hours smoothing out and refining all the shapes in the foam. You want to try and carve out as many imperfections as you possibly can to make it one smooth, uniform shape. This does take ages to do, so make sure you take your time with it and take regular breaks so that you don't get hand cramps.
I can help you out. 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 Look, if you don't.
Once all the cuts are done and it's all nice and smoothed out, you can start gluing on all your individual fins. With larger pieces like this, I find it's very helpful to use any sort of pins that are specifically dedicated to your hot glue. Because trust me, once you stick some pins in hot glue, they ain't never gonna be working in fabric again.
I can help you out. I can help you out. I can help you out.
takes here, I did add a couple more fins near the top because I felt like it helped the design look a little bit more cohesive. Now, our floppy little fish is very solid right now, so we're going to help improve the movement. You're going to mark down and measure these little areas, roughly spaced about the same in between, segment all the way down the tail, and then use your electric knife or some good scissors in order to make precise cuts into the foam. Start with just a singular cut, and then after that you're going to come in at an angle to cut out these small little V-shaped chunks. Try and keep them as close together as possible. You really don't want to make big holes, otherwise you'll definitely see them through the fabric, and it will weaken the overall structure of the tail and cause it to flop over and sag. Nobody likes a saggy booty. You can already see that makes a heck of a difference with movement. Once you're overall happy with how it looks, you do want to stabilize these little fins, as these are very thin pieces of foam. I use just a basic fabric stabilizer here. This is a sew-in fabric stabilizer, but it works just as good when you glue it down, and it just helps the shape hold a lot better. This also helps to keep your fins from deforming. Take your 2-inch elastics now and stretch them across this base here. This will help to strengthen the connection between the tail and the tail fin to prevent it from ripping in the future. Once you have these pieces of elastic glued down, you can now move into the primary elastic for support along the side of the tail. This is just simple 1-inch elastic that I'm stretching fairly tightly as I work my way down the tail and glue it down in segments. I also add additional supports of elastic along the upper spine of the tail, particularly on the area where the fin connects to the main part of the tail. And I also add a couple elastics around the primary shape just for added support, just in case. With these supermotion tails, they tend to get a lot of wiggling and jiggling as they walk through convention spaces, as well as just for entertainment purposes of being wiggled. So I like to make sure that none of my elastics can peel up, or the shape of the tail won't deform. Once all your elastics are attached, go ahead and take a sharp pair of scissors or your electric knife, and you're going to cut a small hole right in the base of the tail near the top. Now, unfortunately, my camera decided that it was going to shift around and block this from view, so hopefully I got as much of it on camera as possible, but I'll put this diagram up as well, just to kind of explain it a little further. Here you can see the tail with all the elastics attached, the carving is done, and of course we have our belt hole. Once the belt is simply inserted into the foam, easy peasy just like that, you're able to pull it through and put it on for a fit. Always make sure you test fit throughout the making process. Now bear in mind, this is still just the foam structure and it needs a bit more support as well as a little bit more tweaking. But thus far you can already see what an awesome improvement this makes. The tail wiggles really well because of the shape and the size of the tail fin, and it just generally has a good shape to it. After a couple of minor modifications, this is now what my tail looks like, and it's ready for patterning. I begin by simply laying duct tape all over the base of the pattern. Now, I want to take a second here to kind of talk about duct tape patterns in general, because I feel like they're not clearly addressed in most tutorials. The whole reason why you use duct tape for your pattern here is because it will give you a two-dimensional pattern of a three-dimensional object. You couldn't just trace this shape onto paper because it's not flat. The tail is round, and therefore there are certain areas that are going to be subject to change when you cut the pieces out. The duct tape allows us to get a perfect pattern so that we know exactly what amount of fur to cut or whatever kind of material we're going to use in order to place this tail on its final version. Now, a common misconception that it took me a while to figure out when I did my very first head and the first time I ever played with duct tape patterns like this: you don't actually leave the duct tape on the dummy once you're done. It gets used to make your pattern and then you throw it away. It does not ever touch the thing again. So make sure that you keep that in mind, because I've seen a couple newbies out there that actually glue their fur down to their tape, which is like, oh no, please don't! Once you've fully taped up the structure, you're now ready to move on to patterning. I always use a black marker in order to define my center lines because there's no sense wasting tape for two sides if I know they're going to be symmetrical. So I'll just divide it up the middle and duplicate my pattern while flipping them. This will give me two perfect halves that I can just sew together. Super easy! Once my center lines are all marked, I do go through and I mark the areas that are going to be cut out differently. The fins in particular, since I know that they're not going to sit totally flat on this material. These little lines that I'm making are going to help me later on for when I go to reattach everything. You also want to make sure you note your fur direction. This is the design that I'm going to be making for this tail. This design was voted on my Twitter as being the most popular. I start by drawing out these beautiful little hibiscus flowers that just look so darn pretty. I wanted to take extra care to make sure that I noted all the different details on them, as well as noting down the fact that there are going to be these little asymmetrical markings on them. Now I'm going a bit ambitious here with these designs, and I'm even going to add a black tiny trim all around the edges, just to make it look a little bit more iconic and cartoony.
Here we go again. Trying hard, but you wanna be my friend. Ain't no place to hide, ain't no one to run to. Here we go again.
There's also these blue tips on some of the fins that I need to mark down. I find it's very helpful to use different colors of Sharpies to mark your different patterns because it'll help your brain differentiate from one and the other. Also make sure that throughout the process, you're marking which direction you want your fur to go, because sometimes it can get super duper confusing with your patterns. With our beautiful template pieces done, we're now ready to cut them off of the foam and free them. Simply take your scissors and poof, editing magic. Wow, so much time saved. Once you cut out each of the individual colors and the pattern pieces, you want to make sure that they lay completely flat. If they don't, you'll need to make what are known as darts to be sewn in later. For more information on darts, I highly recommend looking up a more in-depth YouTube tutorial because they're kind of difficult to explain while not looking at them, so to speak.
Here we go again. Time is up and I'm calling up my friend.
With all my individual pieces, I'm now ready to take them and start transferring them onto fur. The first piece I'm going to start with is going to be the underside of the tail, this beautiful white material. Now, I bought this a couple years ago, so I'm fairly certain that this material was called seal back then. I don't know if it's still in production. I know that beaver is a very close second. But it's a very short fibered material, and it worked perfect for the underside of this tail, since I didn't want it to be super duper fluffy. I wanted it to be smoother skinned, like sharks. A similar kind of technique was done with the black material. This was a local find at my local Joann's. This material is literally softer than a kitten. Like, it is so super duper soft and snuggly, and I figured that it would be absolutely perfect for this super cute tail. It also has this beautiful shininess to it that is just, oh, it's so pretty. I absolutely love it. Try to maximize the usage of your fur so that you don't have to waste a whole bunch. And of course, I had to do the blue. I debated on using a shorter cut from Howl fabric, but I'm kind of saving that for Winza 2.0. So I went ahead and I decided to use this longer fur that I have. But I'll explain what we're going to have to do in order to match the other lengths of my fur in just a moment. Once all these pieces have been cut out, I usually cut them out in one large chunk so that I can shave it all down using my razor. This is a technique that I picked up from watching Motsicles because this is absolutely so much time saving. If you have a bunch of pieces that are all going to be the same length and you don't want to go through the effort of having to shave every single border to match, you can simply just lay it down and shave the entire piece like this and then cut out all your individual pieces. This will ensure that they're all the exact same length, and you don't have to deal with the fiddliness of carving up the tips of the edges once you cut them out. Now, I often get asked, what do I do with all my excess fluff? I actually save it and stick it into tails, because it works really, really good as tail stuffing. Once all your pieces have been cut out, you can now start pinning them all to sew them together. I'll be pinning the top and the bottom of each of these pieces. The important thing to make sure is that you do not attach the tail tip to the rest of the tail. There's a reason for this because obviously this connection point is way too thin. You'd never be able to fit that big old tail fin through that tiny little hole. Here I'm just using a straight stitch on my machine. If you're sewing by hand, you'll have to use a blanket stitch and just take your time because hand sewing always takes forever. It's frustrating, but it is what it is. It's also important to try color matching your threads. Because I'm using black on white here, I definitely make sure to color match because otherwise you would really see the black thread on the white material and the white thread on the black material, which isn't what I want. I want these edges to look super crispy and clean. once all your pieces are sewn together, you're now ready to move into the next portion, such as small details like these. Now, I have these little flower details that I actually did not film the process of because I tried something new with them, so if you want a tutorial on doing small tattoo-like markings, please let me know and I'll do what I can to film a tutorial on that. Also, sorry for the sudden camera fuzziness, the lighting was really bad because we had a storm today. Once you've got everything sewn together, you want to make sure that you turn it inside out, and then begin slipping the skin onto the foam base. This is a bit fiddly and takes a bit of practice, so just work your way through it and eventually it'll get much easier with time, trust me. My first tail sucked at doing this, but ever since then I've figured out how to do it much easier. You'll also notice that this is why we do not attach the tail fin yet. Once I've pushed all the fins into all the different pieces, it all lines up super nice and pretty. Then turn the tail fin inside out, and you can go ahead and slip that on the foam base as well. With the tail tip attached, we can now securely fasten it. How I'm going to do this is using the ladder stitch. If you want a more inclusive tutorial on how to do the ladder stitch, please let me know and maybe I'll make a tutorial about stitching and just all kinds of different useful stitches in general for fursuit making. But if you're ever confused, I highly recommend looking up some tutorials on YouTube. There are some fantastic artisans out there who do an awesome job of explaining how to do this. Now, something else kind of quirky I do is I do this cute little gore cutaway detail, if gore can be cute. And I don't know, there's just something special about having this cute little chopped off tail effect. I think it makes a really fun shock value if you're ever at a convention or you're out public suiting and you take off your tail and people see that it looks like it's been cut off. It always makes people stare and be like, whoa, that's different. And it's just something that I find is fun to do. I made a very rough tutorial for this on my TikTok, but if you'd like a more in-depth tutorial for YouTube, please let me know and maybe I'll go ahead and do one. It'd be fun. In order to attach this piece, I'm kind of doing a ladder stitch, but it's weirdly modified. Like, only the gore bit is the part that gets the ladder stitch, and the other just gets like a half whip stitch. But with all that sewing done, the tail is now complete! Well, I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and, if you made anything with it, I'd absolutely love to see what you did. Feel free to shoot me an email at artbynefertiti@gmail.com. I would absolutely love to see your beautiful, fantastic finned creations. But it's now time for me to take a moment to thank all of my most wonderful and awesomely amazing patrons! These people have been doing such wonderful things and being able to support me, allowing me to make more tutorials like this for you, as well as just fill the world with more beautiful and awesome creations. If you'd like to join these awesome people, please consider checking out my Patreon. That's patreon.com/Nefertiti. A special thank you to my gold tier patrons, Celestial, Julie, and Sea Noodles. And of course, an extra thank you to my platinum patrons, Willy Wolf Creations, Mr. Eight Fingers, Madra, and Zililian. You lot especially have been doing so many wonderful things, being able to support me and help me live my day-to-day life. And especially in times like this, the support of patrons is something that I treasure and value so much. You guys don't realize what a big difference you make in my life, and I honestly cannot thank you enough for that support. So please, if you'd like to join all these awesome people, as well as get access to some awesomely cool free bases that I give away every single Friday, go head over to my Patreon, maybe check it out. But even if you can't become a patron, I'll still continue supporting this world and filling it with more smiles, because you know what? Smiles are free. If you have any suggestions for future videos that you'd like to see, or anything that you're curious on learning how to make, please let me know in the comments below. I always read through them, and if I see a couple that make interesting tutorials, who knows, maybe I'll select some of those to go ahead and do. But I think this video is long enough already. So, as always, I want to thank you so very much, and I hope you have a most wonderful day and a fantastic life.